Greetings, comrades. My name is Ben Irbhinn, and I am the voice of Scottish socialism in Inverclyde. I think I've mentioned it before, but I currently live for 6 months of the year in Petrozavodsk, which is in the Republic of Karelia in Russia. When I'm there, I work as a translator and also do some teaching at a local college. The other 6 months I spend here in Greenock, my hometown, just doing whatever work I can find here. My fiancée is ethnic Ukrainian. She's from a region in the south of Ukraine, and many of her family still live there. Her parents are from a military background, originally the Soviet military, although now obviously the Russian military. They live in a closed city in Russia. So between here in Scotland, in Russia, and from the future in-laws, I've been exposed to just about every angle there is on the current situation in Ukraine. And what I want to do this week is just share some of my own thoughts about what's going on over there, drawing obviously from my own experiences. A number of years ago, I made my first of what would become many visits to Russia. At the time, my ability to speak Russian was rather limited, but after landing in St. Petersburg, I'd managed to negotiate customs and find my way to the nearest metro station. I was heading to Petrozavodsk, the city I now call home for a large part of every year, which is about 8 hours north of St. Petersburg when travelling by train. It was getting late and my train wouldn't leave until the early hours of the morning. I decided just to head straight to the train station and rough it for the rest of the night. Being Scottish, I guess I grudged the idea of paying for a hotel bed that I would only get a few hours use from. Unfortunately, I managed to get off the metro at the wrong station. I'd wandered around for a bit trying to find the train station before I realised my mistake, and by now the metro was closed for the night. Having checked the station guide, I realised I'd got off one station early, and so opted just to walk to the next one. This, I soon found out, wasn't as straightforward as I had imagined. The first obstacle was that unlike in Glasgow or London, where underground stations are relatively close together, making it easy to walk between successive ones, in St. Petersburg it can be literally miles to the next one. A more substantial obstacle, however, was the Neva, the great river on which St. Petersburg is built. The station I had disembarked at was, by sod's law, on the opposite side of the Neva from where I was headed. In a large and modern city like St. Petersburg, this wouldn't normally pose a problem. Bridges are a normal part of the infrastructure. It's a nightly occurrence in the old imperial capital, however, for the bridges to be raised in order for ships to travel up and down the river. I had managed to reach the Neva just as the bridge was being raised. With no way around it, I found a nearby bench and settled down with my suitcase for a cold wait. It was March and temperatures were still below zero. And so belatedly I'm reaching the point of this tale. While shivering away on that bench, I had attracted the attention of a rough-looking local. Between his broken English and my pidgin Russian, we managed to exchange the following personal details: that I was from Scotland and was visiting Russia for the first time, that he was homeless but previously had lived in a Khrushchevka. I later found out that a Khrushchevka is the name given to a kind of apartment block, one which tends to be long and thin and generally not as tall as other Soviet housing blocks, and which were built when the Soviet Union was led by the Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev. During the conversation he had offered me a can of beer, which I tried to refuse, but he insisted until I accepted it. It was all he had with him, so I had been reluctant to take it from him. It occurred to me that it probably wasn't just his last beer. There was a very good chance that, apart from the clothes he was wearing, it was his only possession in the whole world. The beer was an extra strong variety of some Russian brand, probably their equivalent of a can of super. It tasted like nothing else I've ever tasted. I don't mean that in a good way, but after drinking it, I didn't notice the cold anymore. His reasons for acting this way were simple. He gave me his can because he saw me shivering and because I was a visitor to his country and he wanted me to feel welcome. When the bridges finally came down again, he walked with me to ensure I found my way this time. We made what conversation we could and we said goodbye at the train station. Reflecting on this encounter, I would come to realise that this stranger who I met on the banks of the Neva was the embodiment of two lessons I have learned gradually over the course of my life. The first is that if you ever need to ask someone for help, ask the poor people. They are the ones who will help you. The rich don't care about us or our problems. The second is that the Russian people are among the friendliest and most hospitable on the planet. Far from the xenophobic, racist, thuggish, backward people that the Western media portrays them as, most Russians are literally delighted to meet foreigners and are proud to have any foreigners living in their community. My employers in Petrozavodsk even use the fact that they have a Scottish person working for them in their advertisements for the company. This second lesson seems important now, given the current situation in Ukraine, which is why I wanted to share it with you. The USA, having used oligarchs friendly to them, have successfully staged a coup in Kiev and inserted a puppet government with notions of joining the EU and NATO. When the current crisis started in the east of Ukraine early last year, the Western media barely touched it. Any coverage was sparse and half-interested. It was like they thought it would all just go away and they could get on with celebrating the USA's victory of regime change in Kiev. They simply had no idea of the extent to which the events in Kiev shook and traumatised the east of the country. The media's interest was aroused though when the self-defence militias, as they were being called at the time, started occupying government buildings and then whole towns and cities. But their focus lacked any real depth. They never spoke about the demographic makeup of Ukraine, the two countries in one scenario, the history of the current borders. There was no examination conducted of the background to the occupations, no reasons were offered. Even when referendums were called and massive voter turnouts displayed overwhelming support for ending Kiev rule, the Western media still failed to give any in-depth analysis of what was happening in Novorossiya. That this was a grassroots and thoroughly local, at least to begin with, movement, which arose spontaneously in reaction to the Kiev coup, was never mentioned. And it had to be like this. The West couldn't admit that the militias were locals. To give recognition to the fact that there was a massive public support for the militias in eastern Ukraine would have weakened the case for Western support to Kiev. Support, we were told, which was to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Never mind that the West has never really gave a toss about territorial integrity before. Remember what they've done to Palestine, or Yugoslavia, or even Ireland. So what could they do? A familiar response: they lied. The lie of "it's the Russians" has been used ever since. Of course, it's verging on inconceivable that Russia hasn't found itself involved in this mess somehow, and they almost certainly are providing help of some degree or another to the militants in the east. But that has never been the real issue for those on the ground in eastern Ukraine. They saw their government overthrown with the help of a foreign country. They saw an openly fascist regime come to power. They saw their political parties banned. They saw themselves relegated to second-class citizens in the eyes of the law. Subhuman, according to some of the new regime. So they did what any self-respecting people would do. They rose up, threw off the oppressive regime and demanded self-determination. Our media will never tell this side of the story. The Russia factor is hard at work. It is a believable lie, one that is very effective on Western audiences who have been primed to see Russia as the enemy. That is why my encounter with the Russian on the banks of the Neva is so important to me. It is symbolic of the Russian character, the true Russian character of warmth, friendship and generosity. It is far removed from the image of Russians we are bombarded with through our TV screens and in our media. If everyone could see Russians this way, I firmly believe there would be no appetite in the West for our government's reckless support of Kiev. By portraying Russians as the evil enemy, it deflects attention, and when attention is elsewhere, those who would do evil will quite happily get on with doing it. That evil, as I'm speaking to you, is killing innocent people in a long, drawn-out conflict which should never have happened in the first place. The Geneva Convention sets out in law a people's right to self-determination. Referenda in the disputed regions made evident that there was an overwhelming demand for self-determination. Kiev and the West cried that the referenda were not legitimate. That may be the case, but what is the correct response to illegitimate referenda? For me, The answer to is at the earliest possible opportunity, conduct legitimate ones. Kiev's response, which has been fully supported by the West, was to drop bombs on the civilian population of eastern Ukraine, and they continue to do so. They can do so because we are primed to see ethnic Russians as a backward, savage people, and no one ever challenges their governments for punishing savage, backward people. There's an old Russian proverb, Poslednyu Rubahu Oddast, which translates roughly as, "will give you the last shirt one has." It captures perfectly the character of the stranger I met on my first night in Russia, but it also captures the wider Russian spirit of generosity, their willingness to give help where required, whatever the circumstances. Perhaps we could show the same generosity by refusing to accept the images of Russians fed to us by the media, by seeing the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine as real people in need of support, and by demanding that our governments cease enabling Kiev's vindictive and bloody assault on these regions. So how does all this affect us back here in Inverclyde? Well, David Cameron has now decided to send British troops to Ukraine. This is clearly provocative. Anyone with an IQ knows they are risking a confrontation with Russia. Take the fact that Russia has a powerful, functioning army, unlike the UK, where government cuts have limited us to only a small number of troops. The experts all agree that we would have no chance of defeating Russia, given the relative strengths of our armed forces. Add to this Russia's status as a nuclear power, and the fact that should any war with Russia go nuclear, we already know that Faslane is one of the first places Russia will nuke. But of course, as far as the British government and David Cameron are concerned, when they do their risk analysis, in their calculations, West Scotland is acceptable collateral damage. That's why they keep their nukes here. So the Brits are now sending troops to Ukraine, fully aware that it could result in the incineration of Inverclyde and everyone who lives here. And as the Russians have demonstrated more than once by sailing into Scottish waters unchallenged, the Brits don't even seem that bothered about defending us from such an outcome. The Scottish Socialist Party have always campaigned for nuclear disarmament. The risks, if this conflict escalates, show why we are right to do so.
People's flag is deepest red, it's shrouded oft our martyr dead, and ere their limbs grew stiff and cold, their hearts' blood dyed its every fold. So raise the scarlet standard high, within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. The ground the Frenchman loves its blaze, the sturdy German chants its praise. In Moscow's vaults, its hymns are sung, Chicago swells, it's surging throng. So raise the scarlet standard high, within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. It's waved above our infant nights, when all ahead seemed dark as nights, and it's witnessed many a deed and vow. We mustn't change its colour now, so raise the scarlet standard high, within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. well recalls our triumphs past. It gives us hope of peace at last. The symbol breaks, the message plain of human rights and human gain. Soar is the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. With our heads uncovered, swear we are to bear it onward till we fall. Come dungeons dark or gallows grim, this song will be our parting hymn. So is the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
Until next time, power and peace to the people.